We've been considering how to put a series of directions into action to make an adjustment, and in the last episode, we were thinking about how we could create a direction for ourselves, specifically for our sacrum, in order to bring our pelvis into a better orientation. We've seen that people tend to rotate their pelvis forward and down, which causes the back of the pelvis to be angled. At the back of the pelvis is the sacrum, and so, when the back of your pelvis is angled, your sacrum is angled. We represented the sacrum with a pencil, and we asked the question, how many different ways could we rotate the pencil or sacrum in order to straighten them out? And which way is the correct way for our sacrum? To answer this question, we have to understand what people are habitually doing with their pelvis. We've discussed this idea that people are rotating their pelvis forward and down, particularly saying that the points we've called the iliacs move forward and down. But the movement is not simply a rotation. So let's examine what happens. When you're standing, your pelvis will rotate around your hip joints. Since the iliacs are forward of and above the hip joints, a rotation forward will cause the iliacs to move forward and down. But we must also understand that the pelvis as a whole moves, which means even the hip joint itself is being moved through space, forward and down. We do not just have a rotation of the pelvis, we have a movement of the entire pelvis. So while we do want to rotate our pelvis the other way, to undo the habitual rotation forward and down, we also need to really move the pelvis backwards in space. Let's first imagine that we are just going to try to move the pelvis backwards. If we move the top and the bottom of the sacrum backwards at the same speed, then the angle at the back of the pelvis will not change. What will realistically happen is that you will start to fall backwards unless you lean your mid and upper torso forward. This is definitely not how we want to move our pelvis back. Most people already have their lower sacrum and sit bones far back. So when we move our pelvis backwards, we do not want the lower sacrum and sit bones to move even further back. Strangely, this is actually how most people sit into a chair, except they may even push their lower sacrum and sit bones further back, which forces them to press their lower ribs forward and down. That's why many people, when they sit, have to incline their torso quite severely. Whereas, if we look at a picture of F.M. Alexander, we can see that even when he's squatting down to the floor, he does not have to angle his torso nearly as much. But how do we want to move the pelvis backwards? This is where our directions for the sacrum come in. We're going to rotate the sacrum, but where are we going to put the center of rotation? The clearly wrong answer is to place the center of rotation at the top of the sacrum, as that would do nothing to help us move the pelvis backwards in space, and would instead cause us to move the pelvis slightly forward. Placing the center of rotation near the middle of the sacrum is also not going to get you a backward movement of the pelvis. If your pelvis was already back behind your legs, such a direction could be useful, but it will not be sufficient for people who are just starting out with this. We need a direction that will get us a backward movement of the pelvis. What if we try putting the center of rotation at the bottom of the sacrum? Let's use our pencil or ruler as a model again. If we're rotating the pencil with the center of rotation at the bottom, then the bottom of the pencil should not move at all. If you'd like to, pause the video, grab a pencil, and model the movement. The first time you try it, you may realize that it's actually not easy to make the bottom of the pencil not move at all. If you're even a little bit casual with how you rotate the pencil, the bottom will move a bit. I point this out just to remind you that these movements require precision and attention, especially when you're first starting out. Let's now work with the sacrum. While standing, put one of your hands on your sacrum so that the palm is at the top and your fingers are at the bottom. If we put the center of rotation for the sacrum at the bottom, where our fingers are, we can give ourselves the direction to pull the top of the sacrum, where our palm is, backwards to be in line with the bottom of the sacrum. Our hand and our sacrum should become vertically straight. By placing the center of rotation at the bottom of the sacrum, this rotation will function almost like a crowbar. We are prying the entire pelvis backwards and up, but the lower sacrum is not moving back. The goal is to take the weight of the torso off the front of the foot and the front of the knee and bring it to the back of the foot and the back of the knee. It will help at first to have your hand on your sacrum as you try this, but eventually you want to be able to make this movement without the help of your hand. It's also extremely important that you do not bend your knees to get this to work, as we do not want to straighten the lower back by bending and shortening the legs. Try putting this adjustment into action on a 1, 2, 3 count. When we make this adjustment, we are moving the entire torso backwards in space. As you may recall, the pelvis is the bottom of the torso, but it's not quite accurate to say we want to move the entire torso backwards. We can't even say that we want to move the entire pelvis backwards. As we've already covered, we don't want the lower sacrum to move back. So when we make this adjustment, which will generally move the torso backwards, there are two parts of the torso that we do not want to move back. One is the lower sacrum and the sit bones. What is the other part of the torso that we do not want to move back? Think it over and then tune in to the next episode, and we'll make this adjustment even more useful for ourselves.